In Lusaka, Zambia, the afternoon sun was warm but gentle as 62-year-old Mama Ruth walked slowly down the familiar street, a small woven basket of ripe mangoes in her hand. The sweet smell of the fruit reminded her of her late husband, how they used to sit under the mango tree behind this very house, laughing and dreaming about their children's future. When she reached the gate, she paused for a moment, smoothing her faded chitenge and whispering a small prayer. It had been months since she last saw her grandchildren. She missed their laughter, their hugs, their tiny hands tugging at her dress. Smiling softly, she knocked on the front door. The sound of footsteps came from inside. Then the door opened, and there stood Tamara, her daughter-in-law, wearing a sharp expression and cold eyes. "Oh, it's you," Tamara said flatly, leaning on the doorframe as if she didn't plan to invite her in. Mama Ruth's smile didn't fade. "Yes, my daughter. I brought some mangoes for the children. They love them, don't they?" she said kindly, holding up the basket. Tamara rolled her eyes. "We don't need charity, Mama," she said with a small, mocking laugh. "You should have called before coming. We're busy." Mama Ruth's hand tightened around the basket. For a moment her eyes dimmed, but she quickly caught herself and smiled again. "I just wanted to see my grandchildren," she said softly. Tamara shrugged, her voice sharp. "Maybe next time. We have guests coming." And just like that she began to close the door. Mama Ruth stood still, heart heavy but face calm. She looked around at the walls, the garden, the porch she once swept with pride. Everything she and her late husband had built with love now felt like it belonged to strangers. As she turned to walk away, she whispered to herself, voice trembling but strong, "I built this house with love, and now I'm treated like a stranger in it." The mangoes swayed gently in her basket as she walked down the dusty road, her heart aching but her spirit unbroken. Something deep inside told her that this story was far from over. Mama Ruth sat quietly in the corner of the living room, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the faint smell of mangoes still clinging to her clothes. The house felt different, colder somehow, even though it was filled with expensive furniture and bright curtains. She looked around, remembering when this place was full of laughter, when Kelvin was just a boy chasing chickens in the yard, his feet always dusty, his smile always wide. A sudden sound broke her thoughts, tiny footsteps rushing toward her. "Grandma!" her grandson shouted joyfully, running straight into her arms. His laughter lit up the room, warm and innocent, just like old times. Mama Ruth hugged him tightly, her eyes glistening with tears. "My sweet boy," she whispered, kissing his forehead. But before she could even ask about school or his friends, Tamara's sharp voice cut through the moment. "Junior, go wash your hands right now," she snapped. "You don't know where she's been." The little boy froze, confused, then slowly pulled away from his grandmother's arms. Mama Ruth smiled softly and nodded. "Go on, my child," she said, even though her heart cracked a little. As he disappeared down the hallway, Tamara crossed her arms. "You really shouldn't just show up unannounced, Mama," she said coldly. "Kelvin is very busy these days, and I don't like the house getting disturbed." Mama Ruth looked down at her hands, the wrinkles of age tracing her strength and her years of sacrifice. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone," she replied quietly. "I just wanted to see the children. It's been so long." Tamara scoffed, glancing at her phone. "Well, things are different now. We have schedules. You can't just come any time you want." Just then the door opened and Kelvin walked in, holding a briefcase. His eyes widened slightly when he saw his mother sitting there. "Mama," he said, voice uncertain. "You're here." Mama Ruth smiled with genuine warmth. "Yes, my son. I brought mangoes for the children, from the tree your father planted." Kelvin looked from his mother to his wife, his expression tightening. "Tamara told me you came without calling. You know how she gets when things are unplanned," he said carefully, trying to sound calm but clearly uncomfortable. Tamara gave him a small, satisfied glance and walked away, leaving them alone. "Mama, please," Kelvin said in a low voice, rubbing his forehead. "Don't upset her. She's been stressed lately." Mama Ruth's eyes softened, but her heart ached at his words. "I would never upset her, my son. I only came to see my family." He nodded quickly, eager to end the tension. "All right, Next time just call first, okay? She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. Of course, my son. As Kelvin hurried off to his study, Mama Ruth sat in silence again. The house she once filled with joy now echoed with distance and pride. She could feel it. Her son was no longer the boy who ran into her arms. He had become a man who flinched at his wife's glare. Mama Ruth took a deep breath, forcing a gentle smile as she whispered to herself, "Some homes may look beautiful, but they've forgotten what love feels like." Weeks turned into months, and Tamara was no longer the same woman who had once thrown Mama Ruth's things out of the house. She had changed, deeply, quietly, and beautifully. Every morning she helped in the small classroom, sitting with the girls, teaching them how to read, speak with confidence, and believe in themselves. But she didn't just teach from books, she taught from her mistakes. She would tell them softly, "Never think you're better than anyone. Pride can take everything from you. Real strength comes from kindness." The girls adored her, and many of them looked up to her like an older sister. Mama Ruth watched all this with quiet pride. The same woman who once insulted her for being too traditional now wore simple dresses, tied her hair back, and walked with humility. She laughed with the children, sang during lunch breaks, and even helped repair the old school benches. One day, the community held an event to celebrate the school's anniversary. Neighbors, parents, and even the village chief attended. When it was Tamara's turn to speak, she stood at the front, microphone trembling in her hands. Her voice was soft but honest. "I came here broken," she began. "I lost everything because I thought respect came from money and power. But Mama Ruth showed me what real respect means. It comes from love, humility, and forgiveness." The crowd went silent. Some people gasped. Others nodded. Tamara continued, her eyes wet with tears. "I called the police on the very woman who gave us a home. And yet, she opened her doors again when I had nowhere to go. That is the kind of grace I pray to have one day." When she finished, everyone clapped, not out of pity, but because they saw her sincerity. Even Mama Ruth wiped away a tear. Later that evening, Kelvin arrived at the school. He looked thinner, quieter, more thoughtful than before. "Mama," he said, kneeling slightly beside her chair. "Tamara told me everything. I want to help too, this time the right way." Mama Ruth placed her hand on his shoulder. "Then start by building, not taking," she said kindly. Together they began helping with the school, fixing the roof, painting walls, organizing food drives. Slowly, the family found peace again, not through money but through meaning. One afternoon, as the sun set over the hills, Mama Ruth stood outside, watching the children play. She smiled softly as she saw Tamara and Kelvin laughing together, handing out notebooks to the girls. The same house that once tore them apart had now become a place of healing, a reminder that grace can grow even from humiliation, and that sometimes losing everything is what teaches you how to love again. Months later, the sun was warm and bright as Mama Ruth walked slowly down the old familiar road. Her steps were steady, her heart light. When she reached the corner, she stopped. There it was, her old house. But it didn't look the same anymore. The gate was freshly painted, flowers bloomed by the door, and a new sign hung proudly above the entrance. The Ruth Learning Center for Women. Inside the yard, laughter filled the air. Tamara was sitting with a group of children, helping them read. Kelvin was fixing a small fence while chatting with some young boys. The same place that once held arguments and pain now echoed with hope and learning. Mama Ruth stood quietly at the gate, watching the transformation with tearful eyes. A reporter who had come to cover the story noticed her and hurried over. "Mama Ruth," he said warmly, "you built this place years ago, and now it's a center changing lives. But tell us, how did you find it in your heart to forgive them after everything that happened?" Mama Ruth looked at him, a soft smile spreading across her face. Her voice was calm and filled with wisdom as she replied, "Because sometimes the ones who hurt us aren't evil, they're just blind until truth opens their eyes." The reporter stood silent for a moment, moved by her words. In the background, the children began to sing a simple song about love and second chances. Mama Ruth turned to watch them, her eyes shining with quiet peace. The camera slowly pulled back, showing the house, the laughter, and the golden sunset falling over the yard. What had once been a story of humiliation and pain had become one of healing, forgiveness, and grace. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. Days turned into weeks, and the air in the house grew heavier with each passing morning. Mama Ruth tried her best to keep peace. She cooked, cleaned quietly, and stayed out of Tamara's way. But no matter how kind she was, Tamara seemed determined to make her feel unwanted. One evening, Mama Ruth cooked a simple meal, nshima with vegetables, just the way Kelvin used to love it as a boy. She placed the food neatly on the table, hoping it might bring everyone together. But before anyone could eat, Tamara walked in, sniffed the air and frowned. "What's this?" she said sharply. "It's nshima, my daughter," Mama Ruth said with a small, proud smile. "Fresh from the garden." "I thought." "You thought wrong," Tamara interrupted, grabbing the plate and dumping the food straight into the bin. "We don't eat that village stuff here." Mama Ruth froze, the sound of the food hitting the trash echoing louder than any insult. "But it's what your husband grew up on," she whispered softly. Tamara smirked. "Well, he's not a village boy anymore. This is the city. You need to stop living in the past." Mama Ruth said nothing. She just lowered her gaze, feeling a deep ache in her chest. She missed the days when this house smelled of joy, of soap after a good cleaning, of laughter, of love. Now it only smelled of perfume, pride, and disrespect. The next morning she tried to brush it off. She dressed in her favorite bright chitenge and tied her scarf neatly. When Tamara saw her, she laughed cruelly. "Mama, why do you always dress like that? This is not a village market. You look like you just came from the farm." Mama Ruth touched her scarf gently. "This is who I am," she said quietly. "Your husband's mother. The woman who built this home." Tamara rolled her eyes. "Built? Please don't exaggerate. Kelvin and I worked hard for this house." Mama Ruth didn't argue. She just smiled sadly, her eyes glancing around the walls she once painted with her own hands, the same floor she had helped lay down when the house was nothing but bricks and dreams. But the final straw came one morning. Mama Ruth woke up to find her small suitcase packed and placed outside the front door. Her heart sank. For a long moment she stood there, staring at it, unable to breathe. Then the door swung open, and Tamara stood there, her voice sharp as a knife. "I said leave. You're not living here rent-free." Mama Ruth's lips trembled. "My daughter, I never." "I don't care," Tamara snapped. "You've overstayed your welcome. Go back to wherever you came from." Mama Ruth's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She straightened her back, picked up her old suitcase, and looked at the house one last time. Every corner whispered memories. Her husband mixing cement, her laughter as they planted the mango tree, her joy when Kelvin took his first steps here. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "We built this house with our hands, with love, brick by brick." Tamara crossed her arms, frowning. "What did you say?" Mama Ruth looked at her calmly. "Nothing, my child," she said, walking away with quiet grace. But in her heart something stirred, a strength she hadn't felt in years. Because what Tamara didn't know was that the deed of that very house still carried one name, Mama Ruth's. And soon, Tamara was going to learn that the woman she threw out wasn't just a guest. She was the true owner. Mama Ruth came back the next morning, hoping to talk things out calmly. She couldn't just leave everything behind without saying goodbye to her grandchildren. She stood at the gate for a few moments, clutching her small handbag, before quietly walking toward the front door. When Tamara saw her, her face twisted in anger. "You again," she snapped. "Didn't I tell you to leave?" Mama Ruth kept her voice calm. "I only came to speak with Kelvin. I don't want trouble, my daughter. I just need to see my son." Tamara's voice rose. "You don't belong here anymore. You're trespassing on my property." Mama Ruth frowned gently, her patience wearing thin for the first time. "Tamara, this house." But before she could finish, Tamara grabbed her phone furiously. "I'm calling the police," she shouted. "Let's see what they say about you sneaking in here like you own the place." Mama Ruth just stood there quietly, her eyes sad but steady. She had faced harder storms than this. Within minutes, 2 police officers pulled up in a white patrol car. The neighbors peeked through their windows, whispering, watching the scene unfold. Tamara rushed to them the moment they stepped out. "Officers! Thank God you're here," she said breathlessly. "This old woman refuses to leave my house. She's been causing trouble for days." The officers glanced at each other. One of them, a tall man with kind eyes, looked at Mama Ruth curiously. "Madam, may I have your name?" he asked politely. Mama Ruth folded her hands. "Ruth Mwale," she said softly. The officer blinked, his expression changing. "Wait, Mama Ruth, from the Ruth Foundation." Tamara rolled her eyes impatiently. "Who cares who she is? Just remove her from my property." But the officer ignored her and stepped closer to Mama Ruth. "Ma'am, are you the same Mama Ruth who built the girls' school in Kafui?" Mama Ruth nodded gently. "Yes, that's me." He turned to Tamara, now visibly confused. "Madam, can we see the ownership documents for this property?" Tamara crossed her arms. "I don't need to show you anything. This is our home. My husband and I live here." The officer took out his tablet, checking the property database. He scrolled for a moment, then stopped suddenly. His expression turned serious. Slowly, he looked up at Tamara. "Madam, according to property records, this house is not registered under your name. It belongs to Mrs. Ruth Mwale." For a second, the whole world went silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Tamara's mouth opened, but no words came out. Kelvin, who had just arrived from work, froze at the gate, hearing everything. His face turned pale. "Mama, is that true?" he whispered. Mama Ruth nodded quietly. "Yes, my son. Your father and I built this house with our own hands. I let you live here because I wanted you to have a home, but I never transferred the deed." Tamara's face turned red, her voice trembling. "No, no, that can't be." But the truth stood between them, solid, undeniable. The same house she had claimed as her own never stopped belonging to the woman she had humiliated. Mama Ruth looked at the officers and said softly, "There's no need for trouble, officers. I'm not here to fight. I just wanted to remind my children where they came from." The kind-eyed officer nodded respectfully. "Understood, Mama Ruth." As the officers walked back to their car, Tamara stood frozen, shame burning in her chest. The neighbors whispered louder now. Kelvin couldn't even look at his mother. Mama Ruth adjusted her scarf, her voice calm but powerful. "Respect doesn't cost money, my daughter. But the lack of it can cost you everything." Then she turned and walked away, her dignity shining brighter than ever. Tamara's face went pale. Her voice shook as she pointed at the officer. What do you mean? That can't be right. This house is ours. My husband and I live here." The officer didn't argue. He turned his tablet around, showing her the official document on the screen. "According to government records, this property is legally owned by Mrs. Ruth Mwale," he said calmly. "It was never transferred to anyone else." Tamara's lips trembled. No, there must be a mistake. "Kelvin, tell him," she cried, turning toward her husband. But Kelvin stood there like a statue, the color draining from his face. "Mama," he finally whispered, his voice small, full of guilt. "I didn't know. You never told me the house was still in your name." Mama Ruth looked at him gently. Her eyes were soft, not angry. "You never asked, my son," she said quietly. "Your father and I built this house with our hands. Every brick, every nail, every wall, we did it together. When he passed, I couldn't bear to see it empty. So I told you to move in. I wanted you to make it a home, but I never transferred the deed." The neighbors, who had gathered at their fences and windows, whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads. Others looked at Tamara with pity. The proud woman who always boasted about her beautiful home now stood exposed, her arrogance crushed under the weight of truth. Tamara's hands shook as she looked at Mama Ruth. "So, all this time this house wasn't even mine," she said weakly, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Mama Ruth's voice remained calm, though there was deep sadness behind it. No, my daughter. You've been living in my home, the one your father-in-law and I built from nothing. I let you stay out of love. But love doesn't deserve to be repaid with humiliation. The officers stood silently, unsure what to say. Even Kelvin couldn't meet his mother's eyes. He rubbed his hands over his face, ashamed. Mama, I'm so sorry, he said finally. I should have defended you. I let Tamara treat you badly under your own roof. Mama Ruth smiled faintly, her voice steady and full of quiet strength. It's all right, my son. A mother's heart forgives, but it never forgets. She turned slightly, looking at Tamara, who stood frozen in humiliation, tears now rolling down her cheeks. Tamara, she said softly, respect doesn't need wealth, but sometimes wealth must teach respect. Those words hung in the air like thunder. The neighbors stopped whispering. The officers exchanged glances. Even the wind seemed to pause. Mama Ruth adjusted her scarf, lifted her head high, and began to walk away. Her steps were slow but full of dignity. The basket of mangoes she had brought still sat near the door, untouched, forgotten amid the chaos. As she walked past the gate, one of the officers nodded respectfully. You handled that with grace, Mama, he said. Mama Ruth smiled gently. Grace is all a woman has when others forget who she truly is. Behind her, Tamara sank onto the doorstep, covering her face as shame and regret filled her heart. The same house she once used to look down on others had just reminded her, pride can never own what love built. The next few days in the neighborhood were filled with whispers. Everywhere Tamara went, she could feel eyes watching her, the shopkeeper pausing mid-sentence, the neighbor pretending to sweep but listening closely, the church women lowering their voices when she walked by. Everyone knew what had happened. Did you hear? Someone murmured at the corner store. Tamara called the police on her mother-in-law, the real owner of the house. Another woman sighed. Imagine. All that pride, and she didn't even know whose roof she was living under. Tamara tried to hold her head high, but the humiliation was heavy. Friends who once came over for tea stopped visiting. Her phone, once buzzing with messages and invitations, stayed silent. Even her own relatives avoided calling. The shame was too public, too deep. Kelvin tried to fix things. He went to see his mother, begging for forgiveness. But Mama Ruth was no longer in the city. She had quietly packed her few belongings and moved to a small house in the countryside, a place surrounded by tall trees, fresh air and peace. It was the kind of place her soul had longed for. She bought the land using the last of her late husband's savings and turned part of it into something special, a small school for girls who couldn't afford education. The sign outside read, "The Ruth Learning Center, for every girl with a dream." Each morning, Mama Ruth woke up to the laughter of children running through the grass, their bare feet covered in dew. She would stand by the window, her heart swelling with pride. This, she often whispered to herself, is the kind of home that no one can throw me out of. Her days were filled with purpose again. She taught the girls how to read, write, and believe in themselves. In the afternoons, she sat under the mango tree, telling them stories about courage, respect, and kindness. The same mango tree she had planted years ago had given her new fruit, not for eating but for healing. Meanwhile, back in Lusaka, Kelvin's business began to crumble. Clients pulled away, bills piled up, and his savings disappeared faster than he could manage. Tamara tried to keep up appearances, buying things she couldn't afford, pretending everything was fine. But deep down she knew, it wasn't just bad luck. Karma had begun her quiet work. Sometimes, Kelvin sat late at night staring at an old photo of his parents, his father's arm around Mama Ruth, both of them smiling in front of the half-built house. He finally understood what they had built wasn't just a house. It was legacy, patience, and love. And he had let pride destroy it. Back in the countryside, as the sun set behind the hills, Mama Ruth closed her eyes and smiled softly. The sound of children singing filled the air. She had lost a home but gained peace. Still, she knew deep in her heart, life wasn't done teaching Tamara and Kelvin their lesson. Karma was slow but it never forgot. Months passed, and Tamara's perfect image started to fall apart, piece by piece. She still wore designer clothes and posted smiling selfies, pretending everything was fine, but behind the scenes, her life was crumbling. The credit card bills stacked up on the kitchen table. The phone never stopped ringing. Debt collectors, landlords, banks. Yet, Tamara refused to stop spending. Every new bag, every fancy dinner, was just her way of proving she was still that woman. The one who once lived in Mama Ruth's big house. The one who thought money made her untouchable. Kelvin tried to hold things together, but his business was already collapsing. Clients stopped calling and his reputation was damaged. Everyone in town remembered the story, how his wife had called the police on the real owner of the house. No one trusted him anymore. Shame followed him like a shadow. One night, the lights went out in their apartment. The power bill hadn't been paid. Tamara sat in the dark, holding her phone, scrolling through old photos of the house they used to live in. Her eyes filled with tears. "We had everything," she whispered. "And I lost it all because I couldn't stay humble." Kelvin, tired and broken, finally decided to go see his mother. He hadn't seen Mama Ruth since the day of the incident. The road to her new countryside home felt longer than ever. When he arrived, he saw children playing outside, girls laughing, learning, running around. His mother stood nearby, helping one of them with her schoolwork. She looked peaceful, younger even, as if she had left all her pain behind. Kelvin's voice cracked as he said, "Mama." She turned slowly, surprise flickering across her face, then calm understanding. "Kelvin," she said softly, "you look tired." He nodded, his eyes welling up. "I made so many mistakes, Mama. I let pride ruin everything. I hurt you, and I let Tamara disrespect you." His voice broke completely. "Please forgive me." Mama Ruth stepped closer and placed her hand on his shoulder. "I forgave you long ago," she said gently. "But forgiveness doesn't rebuild what pride burned." Those words hit him deep. He lowered his head, unable to look at her. He finally saw what he had lost. Not just the house, not just money, but peace, respect, and his mother's trust. Before leaving, Mama Ruth handed him a small basket of fruit. "You'll always be my son," she said kindly, "but life will teach you what I couldn't." As Kelvin walked away, he looked back at his mother surrounded by the children she was now teaching. Strong, kind, and free. He realized she had built a better life out of the ashes of his mistakes. And for the first time in years, he truly understood what it meant to lose everything, and to deserve it. It was a cold, rainy evening when Mama Ruth heard a knock on her gate. The wind howled, the rain poured, and when she stepped outside, she saw a figure standing there, drenched from head to toe. It took her a moment to recognize the face behind the smeared mascara and soaked hair. It was Tamara. Her clothes clung to her skin, and her eyes were swollen from crying. "Please, please, Mama Ruth," she sobbed. "I have nowhere else to go." Kelvin left. "I lost everything, the house, the car, even my friends. Nobody wants to help me." Her voice broke into small, shaking gasps. "I was wrong. I was so wrong." Mama Ruth stood still for a long time, the rain dripping from her umbrella. She remembered every insult, every proud look, every time Tamara had made her feel small in her own home. But she also saw something different now, a broken woman who finally understood pain. With a slow breath, Mama Ruth unlocked the gate. "Come in, child," she said softly. "I will not let you suffer. But listen carefully. Under my roof, you will learn to serve before you command." Tamara nodded through her tears, whispering, "Yes, ma'am." The first few days were hard. Tamara, who once bragged about her expensive clothes and fancy life, now woke up early to help in the school kitchen. She scrubbed pots, washed dishes, and served food to the girls Mama Ruth taught. Her soft hands became rough, her back ached, and some nights she cried silently in the small guest room Mama Ruth had given her. But something began to change. Each morning, the little girls ran up to her with smiles, calling her Auntie Tamara. They thanked her for the food, shared their stories, and sometimes hugged her tight after class. She started laughing again, real warm laughter she hadn't felt in years. One evening, while helping Mama Ruth prepare dinner, Tamara said quietly, "I used to think family was about power, about who had more. But here, I see it's about love and care. About lifting each other, not breaking each other. Mama Ruth looked at her and smiled faintly. Now you understand, she said. That lesson was waiting for you all along. As the rain began again outside, Tamara helped close the windows and smiled softly. This time she didn't feel ashamed. She felt thankful, because losing everything had finally helped her find what truly mattered. Weeks turned into months, and Tamara was no longer the same woman who had once thrown Mama Ruth's things out of the house. She had changed, deeply, quietly, and beautifully. Every morning she helped in the small classroom, sitting with the girls, teaching them how to read, speak with confidence, and believe in themselves. But she didn't just teach from books. She taught from her mistakes. She would tell them softly, "Never think you're better than anyone. Pride can take everything from you. Real strength comes from kindness." The girls adored her, and many of them looked up to her like an older sister. Mama Ruth watched all this with quiet pride. The same woman who once insulted her for being too traditional now wore simple dresses, tied her hair back, and walked with humility. She laughed with the children, sang during lunch breaks, and even helped repair the old school benches. One day, the community held an event to celebrate the school's anniversary. Neighbors, parents, and even the village chief attended. When it was Tamara's turn to speak, she stood at the front, microphone trembling in her hands. Her voice was soft but honest. "I came here broken," she began. "I lost everything because I thought respect came from money and power. But Mama Ruth showed me what real respect means. It comes from love, humility, and forgiveness." The crowd went silent. Some people gasped, others nodded. Tamara continued, her eyes wet with tears. "I called the police on the very woman who gave us a home. And yet, she opened her doors again when I had nowhere to go. That is the kind of grace I pray to have one day." When she finished, everyone clapped, not out of pity, but because they saw her sincerity. Even Mama Ruth wiped away a tear. Later that evening, Kelvin arrived at the school. He looked thinner, quieter, more thoughtful than before. "Mama," he said, kneeling slightly beside her chair. "Tamara told me everything. I want to help too. This time the right way." Mama Ruth placed her hand on his shoulder. "Then start by building, not taking," she said kindly. Together they began helping with the school, fixing the roof, painting walls, organizing food drives. Slowly, the family found peace again, not through money but through meaning. One afternoon, as the sun set over the hills, Mama Ruth stood outside, watching the children play. She smiled softly as she saw Tamara and Kelvin laughing together, handing out notebooks to the girls. The same house that once tore them apart had now become a place of healing, a reminder that grace can grow even from humiliation, and that sometimes losing everything is what teaches you how to love again. Months later, the sun was warm and bright as Mama Ruth walked slowly down the old familiar road. Her steps were steady, her heart light. When she reached the corner, she stopped. There it was, her old house. But it didn't look the same anymore. The gate was freshly painted, flowers bloomed by the door, and a new sign hung proudly above the entrance. The Ruth Learning Center for Women. Inside the yard, laughter filled the air. Tamara was sitting with a group of children, helping them read. Kelvin was fixing a small fence while chatting with some young boys. The same place that once held arguments and pain now echoed with hope and learning. Mama Ruth stood quietly at the gate, watching the transformation with tearful eyes. A reporter who had come to cover the story noticed her and hurried over. "Mama Ruth," he said warmly, "you built this place years ago, and now it's a center changing lives. But tell us, how did you find it in your heart to forgive them after everything that happened?" Mama Ruth looked at him, a soft smile spreading across her face. Her voice was calm and filled with wisdom as she replied, "Because sometimes the ones who hurt us aren't evil, they're just blind until truth opens their eyes." The reporter stood silent for a moment, moved by her words. In the background, the children began to sing a simple song about love and second chances. Mama Ruth turned to watch them, her eyes shining with quiet peace. The camera slowly pulled back, showing the house, the laughter, and the golden sunset falling over the yard. What had once been a story of humiliation and pain had become one of healing, forgiveness, and grace. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption.